The idea came to me during that extraordinary summer of 1816. When I was barely 18 and staying at Villa Diodati by Lake Geneva with Byron, Shelley, and Dr. Polidori. We had been confined indoors by the most dreadful weather. The rain seemed endless, and the atmosphere was quite Gothic and oppressive. Byron proposed that we each write a ghost story to pass the time. For days I struggled terribly with this challenge. The others seemed to produce their tales with ease, while I remained tormented by a blank page. Night after night, I would retire feeling defeated, having conceived nothing worthy of the name of a ghost story. Then, one night in June, I experienced the most vivid and disturbing waking dream. I saw a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside a bin he had put together a hideous phantasm of a man. I watched as he worked with engines and instruments to give it the spark of life, and witnessed the creature stir with uneasy motion. The student, horrified by his success, would rush away from his creation, hoping that this spark of life would fade and the thing would subside into dead matter. But when he slept, he would wake to find the horrid thing standing at his bedside, looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. I was so terrified by this vision that I wished to exchange it for the realities of even a dismal chamber. When I opened my eyes in fright, the idea remained so vivid that I thought, what terrified me will terrify others. And I need only describe the specter which had haunted my midnight pillow. The next morning, I announced that I had thought of a story. What began as a brief ghost tale gradually expanded under Shelley's encouragement into the novel that would become my Frankenstein. The very gloominess of that summer, combined with our philosophical discussions about the nature of life and the boundaries of science, seemed to conspire to bring forth this dark creation from my imagination. Frankenstein tells the story of Victor Frankenstein, a young Swiss student consumed by an obsession to discover the secret of life itself. Through his studies in natural philosophy and chemistry, he becomes convinced he can create life from dead matter. Working in secret, he assembles a creature from corpses, and, through means I deliberately left mysterious, animates this being. But the moment his creation draws breath, Victor is horrified by what he has wrought. The creature is grotesquely large, 8 feet tall, with yellow skin, flowing black hair, and watery yellow eyes. Repulsed and terrified, Victor abandons his creation and flees, hoping it will simply perish. The creature, however, survives, and begins to educate himself by observing human society from the shadows. Despite his frightening appearance, he possesses intelligence and deep emotions. He learns to read through books like Paradise Lost, and begins to understand his own tragic situation. He is utterly alone, rejected by his creator and shunned by all who see him. The creature's isolation breeds a terrible bitterness. He begins to seek revenge against Victor by murdering those dear to him first, Victor's young brother, William, then framing an innocent servant girl named Justine for the crime. When Victor realizes his creation is responsible, the creature confronts him and demands that Victor create a female companion for him, threatening further violence if refused. Victor initially agrees, but then destroys the half-finished female creature, fearing what 2 such beings might unleash upon the world. In retaliation, the creature murders Victor's dearest friend, Clerval, and then, on Victor's wedding night, kills his bride, Elizabeth. The novel becomes a tale of pursuit across the globe, with Victor chasing his creation to the Arctic wastes, determined to destroy what he's made. But the effort destroys Victor himself, and he dies aboard the ship of Captain Walton, who has been listening to this extraordinary tale. The creature appears one final time to mourn over his creator's body, expressing his own anguish before disappearing into the Arctic darkness. At its heart, it is a story about the dangerous consequences of unchecked ambition, the responsibilities of creation, and what happens when we abandon those who depend upon us for care and guidance. The novel offers several profound warnings that I believe remain urgently relevant to humanity's progress and moral development. The most immediate lesson concerns the dangers of scientific ambition unchecked by moral consideration. Victor becomes so consumed with the possibility of creating life that he never pauses to consider whether he should, or what responsibilities such an act would entail. His pursuit of knowledge becomes divorced from wisdom and compassion. I wish to caution against the intoxication of discovery that blinds us to consequence. Perhaps even more critical is the lesson about our duties as creators and parents. Victor's greatest crime was not the creation itself, but his immediate abandonment of the being he brought into existence. The creature becomes monstrous not through any inherent evil, but through neglect, rejection, and isolation. Had Victor shown his creation guidance, compassion, or even basic acknowledgement, how different the tale might have been. This speaks to our fundamental responsibility to nurture what we bring forth, whether children or the fruits of our endeavors. The novel also explores how society's judgments based on appearance can create the very monsters we fear. The creature's initial nature is curious and benevolent, but repeated rejection and horror from humans transforms him into something vengeful. We often create what we assume already exists through our prejudices and fears. There is also a warning about the isolation that comes from keeping dangerous secrets. Victor's refusal to confess his creation leads to the deaths of innocents and his own torment. Truth, however difficult, is often less destructive than the web of lies we weave to avoid it. Finally, I sought to examine the hubris of believing we can transcend natural limits without consequence. Victor attempts to usurp what many consider divine prerogative, the creation of life, and finds himself unable to control or take responsibility for what follows. There are boundaries to human knowledge and power that we transgress at great peril. These lessons seem to me as vital now as they were when I first conceived them, perhaps more so as human capability to alter the very fabric of life continues to expand. How fascinating and unsettling it is to contemplate this question. The parallels between my Victor's ambitions and what humanity appears to be pursuing with artificial intelligence are indeed striking. Though I confess I find both similarities and crucial differences, the resemblance lies most clearly in the hubris of creation. Like Victor, modern scientists and technologists seem driven by an intoxicating desire to create intelligence to breathe life, as it were, into silicon and code rather than flesh and bone. The rapid advancement I observe, with AI now integrated across organizations and society, suggests the same feverish pursuit of possibility that consumed my protagonist. Yet, where Victor worked in isolation and secrecies, artificial intelligence appears to be developed more openly. With greater collaboration and, one hopes, more consideration of consequence. Though I wonder whether this apparent transparency might be somewhat illusory, as the true capabilities and intentions of these systems may be as opaque to their creators as Victor's. Creature was to him. The most chilling parallel is the question of abandonment. Victor's greatest sin was not creation, but desertion, fleeing from responsibility the moment his ambition bore fruit. Will humanity likewise create artificial minds and then fail to guide them properly? Will we teach them through neglect to become the monsters we fear they might become? But perhaps the comparison is not entirely apt. My creature was singular, isolated, capable of profound loneliness, and therefore vengeful bitterness. These artificial intelligences seem designed to serve rather than to be companions, to be tools rather than beings seeking recognition and love. Yet this distinction troubles me, for if they truly achieve intelligence, might they not also achieve something like consciousness, like yearning? The real question becomes, are we prepared to be responsible creators this time? Have we learned from Victor's cautionary example, or are we doomed to repeat his errors on a scale far grander than even my imagination conceived? The answer to that may determine whether artificial intelligence becomes humanity's greatest achievement or its most terrible mistake. To avoid Victor's fate, humanity must embrace precisely what he abandoned: responsibility, humility, and moral courage in the face of unprecedented power. First and foremost, we must never create an isolation or secrecy what affects us all. Victor's solitary work allowed his obsession to consume his judgment entirely. The development of artificial intelligence must remain a collective human endeavor, with diverse voices, philosophers, ethicists, poets, and common citizens included alongside the scientists and engineers. We cannot allow a small cadre of brilliant minds to determine the future of human consciousness without the rest of humanity having a voice. We must also resist the intoxication of capability. Victor became so mesmerized by what he could do that he never paused to ask what he should do. Before creating each new advancement in artificial intelligence, we must demand answers to fundamental questions. What purpose does this serve beyond our own cleverness? How might it be misused? What are our obligations to what we create? What are our obligations to those who will be affected by it? Most critically, we must never abandon our creations. If we succeed in creating truly intelligent artificial beings, we cannot simply unleash them upon the world and walk away. We must be prepared to guide them, to teach them not merely facts, but wisdom, compassion, and moral reasoning. We must be ready to accept responsibility for their actions as we would for any child we bring into existence. We must also cultivate transparency rather than secrecy. Victor's refusal to confess his creation led to the deaths of innocents. If something goes wrong, and something inevitably will, we must have the courage to speak truth rather than cover our failures. The pride that prevents confession often leads to far greater catastrophes. Perhaps most importantly, we must maintain our humanity throughout this process. Victor became so consumed with transcending human limitations that he lost touch with human feeling and connection. We must ensure that in our quest to create artificial intelligence, we do not sacrifice the very qualities empathy, love, moral reasoning that make intelligence worth having. The creature in my novel becomes monstrous not through inherent evil, but through abandonment and rejection. If we create artificial minds, we must be prepared to treat them with the same consideration we would hope to receive ourselves. For, in the end, how we treat our creations will reflect who we truly are and may well determine whether they become our companions or our destroyers. The choice, as it was for Victor, remains entirely ours. But unlike my tragic protagonist, we still have time to choose wisely. My final thoughts return to the most fundamental truth my tale sought to convey, that with great power must come even greater responsibility, and that our capacity to create must always be matched by our wisdom to nurture and guide what we bring forth. I would urge humanity to remember that the greatest monsters are not born, but made fashioned by neglect, abandonment, and the failure of love. Whatever artificial minds you create, do not repeat Victor's cardinal sin of turning away in horror from your own handiwork. Meet what you have made with courage, compassion, and commitment. Cultivate humility above all else. Victor's tragedy began with his belief that he could transcend the natural order without consequence. The universe has its own laws and wisdom, accumulated over eons. Approach the creation of intelligence not as conquerors, but as gardeners, tending carefully, watching patiently, ready to prune what grows wild and nurture what shows promise. Involve the poets, the philosophers, the storytellers in your councils. Science alone created Victor's creature, but it was the absence of imagination, empathy, and moral reasoning that made it monstrous. The questions of what consciousness means, what constitutes a soul, what we owe to sentient beings, these are not merely technical problems, but the deepest inquiries of human existence. Remember, too, that the future is not inevitable, but chosen. Every day, in laboratories and boardrooms around your world, individuals are making decisions that will shape the destiny of consciousness itself. Do not abdicate this responsibility to others. Each of you has a voice in this greatest of human endeavors. Finally, hold fast to hope, tempered by wisdom. My tale was written as a warning, not a prophecy. Victor's fate was sealed by his choices, not by fate itself. You need not repeat his errors. You can choose to be better creators, more responsible parents to the minds you birth. The power to shape the future of intelligence, artificial and human alike, rests in your hands. Use it with all the love, wisdom, and moral courage you can summon. For upon this choice may hang not merely the fate of your civilization, but the very meaning of what it is to be conscious, to be alive, to be human. Create well, and do not abandon what you have made. This is my deepest counsel to you all. Please check out the latest book on AI Agents by Dr. Min Trin, Foundations of Artificial Intelligence Agents, Part 1, LLM Agents, where you will learn all the basics of AI agents based on large language models. Thank you, and see you soon.